More Better Media LLC, the company that's the umbrella that holds together all my media content stuffies that I do out here, is a brand that has a brand called History is Every Day. This was an offshoot I did of something I did for radio after we wrapped up Black History Month and wanted to keep doing some history stuff because for us, history is every day, no matter whether it's February or whenever. But it turned into, as I left radio and took the project with me private, just a way for me to drop in history stuff in a way of newsletters and videos and little drops here or there. That doesn't bog down the other things. It really got into the way of things like things you might have heard because it made it a little bit longer when it was already going long, trying to make it shorter and pithy and cool for the kids. But what's really sort of apropos about More Better Media and all the media I produce, and especially things for the Conversation Project and this thing here for history stuff, is the fact that we're watching history made every day, extended wise, with the government shutdown right now in 2025. As of the 19th of October, unless they come together later on while after I publish this video, they're still fighting over opening the government, and this is right now the third longest government shutdown in modern history. What we're going to do today in this video here, assuming it's not too far out of the way in the future, or just for a future kind of signpost, if you will, is go over this shutdown, the 5 previous ranked top shutdowns, what they mean for us then, what they mean for us, the old ones now and this one right now, and will we learn something from watching all these things to keep this from happening again? Spoiler alert, since we're in the middle of one right now, we probably won't. But this is basically a long slog on some government shutdown, so don't expect fireworks, don't expect funky stuff. Expect some real knowledge and some real slow stuff that's going to happen coming forward. You've been warned. The current government shutdown, October 1st through October 19th, 2025. As the date of this recording, that's 19 days and counting. On October 1st, 2025, at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the federal government of the United States began a full shutdown, triggered by Congress's failure to enact appropriations legislation or a continuing resolution to fund the government for fiscal year 2026. The impasse reflected deep partisan divisions over health care subsidies, which notably supported the Affordable Care Act, foreign aid rescissions, and federal spending levels. Mid-October, as is right now, the 19th, the shutdown has reached multiple weeks, placing it among the longest shutdowns in U.S. history. Agencies facing large-scale furloughs and work without pay for countless federal workers right now. National parks and museums operated at reduced capacity and now starting to shut down. Critical functions are delayed or suspended, and economic ripples are felt in travel, infrastructures, and other sectors. Wherever you are, you're starting to feel something by now, 3 weeks into this shutdown. The significance of this shutdown goes beyond its duration. It exemplifies how the U.S. budget process, the originally designed to maintain government operations through timely appropriations, has in recent decades become vulnerable to brinkmanship. Examining the current shutdown, we'll look into the past, some of the longest shutdowns in history, in the modern history at least, and understand the patterns and outcomes and the lessons from them, and see if we learn something from them. The longest government shutdown in recent history. Donald Trump's first shutdown as 45. December 22nd, 2018 to January 25th, 2019, 35 days. The longest federal government shutdown on record occurred in December of 2018, the 22nd to begin with, and ran to January 25th of 2019, lasting 35 full days. The shutdown cause came from the standoff between the Trump administration, of course led by 45 Donald Trump, and congressional Democrats over the president's funding of a border wall, demanding $5.7 billion for funding for a border wall across the U.S.-Mexico border. You remember that fight. Democrats refused to approve this spending, and such we had the shutdown here. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers were furloughed or worked without pay, affecting agencies across the government, and airport operations, air travel experienced major disruptions. Some staff, air traffic controllers and TSA workers specifically, called out sick and operated under strain in the process. And this, of course, happened over the holidays from Christmas through New Year's all the way up into February. The economic cost was estimated at about billions, and you can just roll that out as a simple number, just billions. Federal spending is halted in many areas, and confidence was dented across our nation. Now, ultimately, Congress passed a spending deal that did not fund the full wall for the president. The government reopened, and negotiations continued separately on border wall. Over time, more monies, more allocations were given to Donald Trump for his border wall, but not the upfront $6 billion he asked for. Shutdown actually showed how major policy demands stuck up the appropriations and can create a long stalemate even when most agencies are ready to go. All the monies was ready to go out the way except Trump wanted this border wall out of nowhere. It also emphasized that key functions like air travel can suffer quickly, attract public pressure to what's happening there. Right now, air travel is one of the biggest things we're seeing as the first things hit inside of our shutdown. Travel already having some issues as well. But now we're starting to see more things like parks, like museums, like people getting paid, especially the soldiers who are doing extra work in some of their deployments, who at this point may start missing paychecks. A Bill Clinton shutdown, the second longest, December 1995 to January 1996, 21 days. The second longest significant shutdown occurred during the administration of President Clinton from December 1995 to January 1996, another over the holidays break lasting about 21 days. Budget dispute over the Clinton White House and Republican-controlled Congress, which was led by then-Speaker Newt Gingrich, over Medicare, Medicaid, welfare reform, and balancing budget. These are all similar items to what we're complaining about right now, minus the border wall, because it's all based on how the government works on funding to take care of people who need taken care of. Many federal services were closed or scaled back. Public confidence was affected. Both sides endured political costs. You may see a pattern going here that will continue with the other three shutdowns. A compromise budget agreement was reached, reopening governments and averting an even longer shutdown. So this is number two. Number one for this time. Even when a shutdown is not longest, demand to trust and operations of the government can linger, and the political stakes are high for both parties. This one, up until Trump's, was the longest one in modern times. The other ones all basically attributed to basically the same sort of people, but it was an issue that takes a long time to get over. A Barack Obama shutdown, September 30th to October 17th, 2023, lasting 16 days. One of the top ranking shutdowns in modern times, and the third ranking in this list, is Barack Obama's. Well, it was third until Donald Trump's hit this one, but we'll see how this one goes. His lasted 16 days from September to October in 2013. As Republicans in the House sought to delay or defund the Affordable Care Act, that theme comes back up again, as a condition for passing the spending bill, and the Democrats resisted, and we shut down the government again. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees were furloughed. Some regulatory and research work was paused. National parks were closed, and economy suffered. In fact, Obama was down with closing national parks when it happened. He was ready to fight this one, and the thing was, parks were shut down, parks shut down. A temporary continuing resolution was actually negotiated. Government reopened, and ACA remained intact, which is one of the themes right now. In the big, beautiful bill, whatever you want to call it, whatever ugly name you want to call it, there are provisions to take away things that will, in this immediate term, basically in January, take away subsidies for many folks who use ACA, Obamacare, to pay for health insurance, and in a sense, double and triple their insurance right now. Then in a year from now, when the bigger pieces from the big, beautiful bill come into place, there'll be more suffrage happening here. So that's part of what's going on with the fight right now for this shutdown, fixing the ACA issues, keeping those subsidies there. But back then, it was basically making it stay at all, because ACA, government, and Obamacare was socialism, was bad, and Republicans were fighting it. They didn't fight it hard enough to get rid of it, and they eventually did open the government back up again. Jimmy Carter's 1978 shutdown, from September 30th to October 18th, 1978. This one lasting 17 days. This is technically the fourth longest, although with this one now, this is the third, pushes thing down to the fifth spot. Under President Jimmy Carter in 1978, a funding gap resulted in a shutdown about 17 days, and this was the second of his era. We'll get to the other one in just a moment. Disagreements over funding for certain public works projects, including nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, and provisions tied to abortion funding in Medicaid. Medicaid pops up, medical stuff, and paying for things. This one was a big deal for military stuff as opposed to a wall that is pretty much ineffective. At the time, the shutdown procedures were less rigorous because they didn't happen the way they did. So many agencies continued functioning, and the impact was less dramatic compared to later shutdowns. Nowadays, since all the funding is based off of, budget bills and things like that, it wasn't a big deal. Or nowadays is a bigger deal than it was like then. This time, it was still within a frame where the budget hadn't quite kicked in. It was just the beginning of October, and in the 70s, we had other issues with money. So It worked a little better. Legislation was adjusted to remove the contentious funding provisions. The things they didn't like was just taken out, and the government reopened. This was a case where everybody negotiated. They didn't like something, and eventually they pulled it out and just moved on with life. Whether it was better or worse for folks, time is telling us, but we do see that if you want to negotiate, you can do that. Now, early shutdowns were less disruptive because agencies often just stayed open and worked. They knew they were getting paid and knew things were happening, and the government would be good on it. But they still reflect how policies, riders, and appropriations can trigger funding gaps. And when those funding gaps happen, you've got to deal with them. And in this case, it's a shutdown. Also, in this case, the Jimmy Carter 1977 shutdown effectively tied with the 1978 shutdown. This one had some gaps, particular creativity, from September 30th to October 13th, 1977, then from October 31st to November the 9th, also 77, and also November 30th to December the 9th, 1977, for a 12-day, 8-day period. So with the stretches, it basically ties with the other one. Way back in 1977, the federal government experienced 3 separate funding gaps, 12 to 8 days in a year of budget standoffs. Disputes between the House and the Senate over whether Medicaid would fund abortion care, among other issues. Yes, this would come back up the year later, but at this point, they were trying to deal with it in the front end. Because the legal framework and full agency shutdowns was not yet in place, most agencies continued working. The public did not experience the kind of widespread interruption seen in later years. This happened for 77 and 78 because things weren't the way they are now these days. Funding was restored gradually after disputes over abortion funding was resolved. One thing they didn't like, they talked it out, they worked it out, it happened. Now, early shutdowns show how the budget gaps eroded the social policy and the funding riders disputes can actually trigger federal standoffs. We've said that a few times. But even when institutions have consequences, and they're less severe than they are in later shutdowns, there's still consequences. These are some of the things that made Jimmy Carter seem like one of the worst presidents ever. And you can take your list of the 47, although, Trump is 2 in those parts, and see how you want to place people going back and forth. It's an issue of looking at it for the times, what it was, and where things are going in our time. Repercussions of the current shutdown and lessons from history. Let's go back to the future, the right now, if you will, at 2025, with shutdowns already wreaking measurable effects for the only 19 days into this one. Approximately 900,000 federal workers may be furloughed. About another 700,000 might be required to work without pay over the course of this time. Some already furloughed and working without pay, many more as the weeks go on. Agencies that are in the crosshairs having serious issues include the National Nuclear Security Administration, the one that watches the missiles and the bombs, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, that shoots up the things in the space. They face major staffing cutbacks or program suspensions because we can't fund it. Key infrastructure fundings is also being frozen, including a $11 billion Army Corps of Engineers projects that should be in works right now to begin the fiscal year. Economic forecasting estimates weekly GDP growth could be cut by about 0.1 to 0.2% each week the shutdown persists. Not good. And military families and federal employees are facing some immediate hardships. This is in terms of delayed paychecks, increased uses of food banks, and uncertainty about back pay. Oh, Donald Trump says he's going to pay people who deserve it, people who fall in line with him. They're not going to pay back the Democrat folks. I'm not sure which people are the Democrat and Republican folks and which of those are in the military who right now are technically missing paychecks. Now, operational backlog and service delays are going to be an issue as agencies that are closed or scaled back have to come back to a surge of work when things reopen. All the things that have been delayed, have been postponed, must be put back into order pretty quickly. Slower processing of permits, even though they're processing, tax refunds and benefits, and also approvals for anything. Past shutdowns have showed that recovery takes weeks, if not months, to get back into shape. Prolonged disruptions reduce businesses and confidence in everything. Delay in government contracts may prompt postponement of private investments tied to federal programs. The grants for research, for infrastructure, all those monies that trickle down to work on things can't trickle down until things go back to some semblance of normal and order. And of course, we talk a lot about the erosion of public trust. Frequently, the lengthy shutdowns erode confidence in governing institutions and raise questions about the reliability of federal functions, i.e., why can't our Congress go to work, do some work like we sent them to do, and not just run to cameras and mug on TikTok and shut governments down. This can have political consequences, maybe. We've seen them as past shutdowns where they do. The group that gets blamed for it ultimately sees some sort of shift. And it's usually the group that's in charge of the government holds most of the cards, most of the bodies, most of the people in the House and the Senate, and can probably pass it just for a little help on one side. But when that one side is just big enough to keep everything from happening, you see what happens here. It also sets precedent for tougher bargaining tactics, because when they become tools in budget negotiations, as it happened a lot for the Carter administrations, you can see where they can be pulled out right at the right time or wrong time to make a will be a will. They can encourage deeper standoffs in future cycles, essentially longer shutdowns, to make sure that what you want gets in there. You don't hold hostage the hostage, or you don't hold the hostage hostage. You don't shoot the hostage taker. All those types of different sort of metaphors that I'm messing up right now is where you go to it. If you know you can get some pressure on folks by putting pressure on them and they don't want to show they're caving so they won't cave, eventually somebody will take the blame. Continuity is bad because once you cut things off, you cut them off. You don't have any sort of continuity, any sort of reliability, any sort of momentum going forward. So when policies come back to order, people go back to work, it'll take some time to get the momentum back to going. Now, the past can teach us a lot. All those past shutdowns we looked at before, and, maybe Thomas Jefferson had a shutdown sometime. Maybe look for that one. But it really is some things looked down to for learning from what we've done in the past that we should be focused on right now. 4 major shutdowns from above have drawn these big policy issues. Avoiding policy riders that are tied to appropriations. Wall funding. Healthcare defunding, abortion policy, those things that if in the way of the political landscape, whether people want them or don't want them, or whether the party in charge wants them or don't want them, turn into things that are easy triggers to pull and stop all funding whatsoever. They can be attached to budget bills and become poison pills that keep them from going forward. Keeping appropriations separate from major policy fights reduces the chance of gridlock. If you don't have some sort of appropriation for a bridge someplace that nobody wants to, in the actual policy work, then it saves those issues. Continuing resolutions are the safety valves, and they are used often. The problem with that is, the big sort of debate is, that means we never balance a budget. We just keep writing off saying we can raise our credit, which is true. And a balanced budget will be great. But a timely stopgap for funding to avert any sort of full shutdown is just like having overdraft protection on your checking account that's tied to a credit card. Yes, it extends what's on your credit card, and you must have the budget there to pull from it, but it keeps you from overdrawing and keeps you from the extra fees going forward. It is a safety net that's much, much, much less expensive than the alternative. The political costs will be high, but they may need to be higher. It has to be less than just a complaint about your side and your jersey fighting back and forth. It really has to be something that's going to get somebody poked in the chest and told that you're going to get changed, you're going to lose you, and have it something really afraid of. This was something that kind of bit Newt Gingrich back in the butt back in the days, but he had other things to worry about. But this is something that in the cost of the shutdown here, whether you call it a Democrat shutdown or a Republican shutdown or a Trump shutdown, somebody should face some consequences, and probably no one will. And there should be some reforms to the institutions that need them. Propose automatic continuations to resolutions when deadlines are missed. Should do some automatic frameworks to prevent furloughs from happening. Making sure things are in place so that you don't have these issues. That's something that should be there, along with transparency and communication. If both sides were talking to us properly, we wouldn't have this issue, right? The problem is both sides are talking around each other and not to each other to make things work out. They're not being transparent with the actual truth of what's here. They're not communicating with us, the people, properly, other than catchphrases and different sort of memes. And they're not communicating with themselves to figure out what the nation needs. And the whole point of the negotiation is you don't get everything you want. You have to work towards getting the greater good, folks. And sometimes it means giving some things up. And so this shutdown from October 1st to October 19th here in 2025 is already among the longest U.S. history, so we've made history today. It carries serious consequences both now and in the future. And by studying the shutdowns from the past, from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you can see the ones that really did have impact. Some big ones, including like all the ones that Carter dealt with and the ones that Clinton and Obama and Trump had last time. The policymakers and public can actually understand better how the impasses starts and stops and damage accumulates. Essentially seeing the people involved in these things, people who were supposedly negotiating and not doing it well, and how, in some cases, egos and policies that were not great got in the way of getting things done. The mechanisms that can reduce these things are there, and they're pretty simple if all parties actually want to be involved properly and legitimately. Ideally, one day we might adopt a structural of reform that the American government is less vulnerable to these things being brought to a halt over budget standoffs. That's an ideal. We'll see if we get there and when we get there, and we'll see when we reopen the government now, because we're not going to keep it closed forever. That's obvious. It can't be closed forever. Things must be done. But the length that the Republicans and the Democrats, or Democrats, Republicans, based on which side you want to say is in charge, will go to keep things from not working. I was going to show this generation of people how our government works, that hopefully the next generations in history won't just scratch their heads and wonder, but will learn from and be better than us.